Riley Martinez had perfected the art of being invisible. As she settled into seat 8 now on Flight 482 from Phoenix to Denver, she pulled her black windbreaker tighter and avoided eye contact with everyone around her. The worn, military boots on her feet told a story she never shared, and the dog tags tucked carefully beneath her shirt remained hidden from casual observation. The Tuesday afternoon flight was routine half-empty cabin, experienced crew, cloudless skies, stretching endlessly beyond the small window. Riley had chosen this seat deliberately, 3 rows behind the wing, close enough to feel the engine vibrations through the fuselage, but far enough back to remain unnoticed. She declined the beverage service with a quiet nod, declined the snacks. When the cart rolled by, accepting only a small cup of water, "Seat 8 now looks like she's running from something," whispered Jessica, the lead flight attendant, as she passed through the galley. The crew often made casual observations about passengers during downtime, and Riley had become their latest subject of speculation. Probably just another gamer heading to some convention, laughed Mark, the senior flight attendant, adjusting his tie. Or maybe a veteran who doesn't like crowds. They had no idea how close to the truth they were. Riley's boarding pass showed only her first name. No special services required. No flags in the airline system. She wasn't listed on any loyalty program database. To everyone around her, she was just another forgettable passenger on a routine flight. But forgettable was exactly what she wanted to be. The businessman in 18B had tried to make small talk during takeoff, commenting on the weather and asking about her destination. Riley had responded with a polite but firm shake of her head, then turned toward the window. For 2 hours and 37 minutes, she remained perfectly still, headphones on, eyes closed, occasionally shifting position but never engaging with the world around her. Her hand would unconsciously move to touch the dog tags hidden beneath her shirt whenever the aircraft experienced turbulence, a nervous habit she developed over years of flying in much more dangerous circumstances. The smooth commercial flight felt almost luxurious compared to the military transports she'd grown accustomed to, but old habits died hard. Riley had been traveling for 3 days straight, moving from one anonymous airport to another, one forgettable seat to the next. She was heading to Denver for reasons she couldn't discuss with anyone, carrying nothing but a single canvas bag and memories she wished she could leave behind. The passenger manifest listed her as just another civilian, and that's exactly how she preferred it. As the flight progressed smoothly through the afternoon sky, Riley allowed herself to relax slightly. The engines hummed steadily, the cabin remained quiet, and the flight attendants moved through their routines with practiced efficiency. She'd learned to read the subtle signs of aircraft operation, the way changes in engine pitch or air circulation could indicate potential problems. Everything sounded normal, but Riley had also learned that normal could change in an instant. The captain's voice had been strong and clear during the initial boarding announcements, and the takeoff had been textbook perfect. The co-pilot had handled the routine communications with air traffic control smoothly, and the flight attendants had moved through their safety demonstrations with the kind of casual confidence that comes from years of experience. Yet something about this flight felt different to Riley, though she couldn't quite identify what. Maybe it was the way the captain's voice had carried a slight tremor during the departure announcement, or the way the co-pilot had seemed to check his instruments more frequently than usual. Or maybe it was just her own paranoia, developed through years of expecting the worst possible scenarios. As they approached the final hour of flight, Riley opened her eyes for the first time in over an hour and listened carefully to the sounds around her. Engine pitch, air circulation, the subtle vibrations that indicated aircraft status. Everything seemed normal. She closed her eyes again and tried to push away the nagging feeling that something was about to go wrong. She had no idea that in less than 20 minutes, her carefully maintained invisibility would be shattered forever. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom at exactly 3:42 in the afternoon, Mountain Time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into Denver International Airport shortly. Please secure your—" His words began to slur noticeably, like someone fighting off sleep or struggling with sudden illness. Riley's eyes snapped open. She'd heard that kind of voice before, in situations where pilots were fighting to stay conscious. The silence that followed stretched for several uncomfortable seconds, filled only by the steady hum of the engines and the subtle sounds of air circulation. Then came the static. A dull thump echoed from somewhere behind the cockpit door. The cabin erupted into the kind of chaos that turns routine flights into nightmares. Passengers looked around nervously, suddenly aware that something was seriously wrong. Someone dropped their magazine. A child started crying in row 12. The businessman beside Riley frantically checked his phone for signal, cursing under his breath when he found none. Riley listened carefully to the sounds around her engine pitch, air circulation, the subtle vibrations that indicated aircraft status. Her hand unconsciously moved to touch the dog tags hidden beneath her shirt, a nervous habit that had developed over years of flying in much more dangerous circumstances. For the first time since boarding, she looked completely, intensely alert. Flight attendants rushed toward the cockpit with urgent, professional movements that immediately signaled something was seriously wrong. Jessica, the lead flight attendant, disappeared behind the cockpit door for what felt like an eternity. When she emerged, her face was pale, and her usual composure was completely shattered. "We need any pilot," she shouted desperately down the narrow aisle. "Anyone! Do we have a licensed pilot on board?" The panic was immediate and visceral. An elderly man in row 5 stood up quickly, then sat back down again, hands visibly shaking. A young mother clutched her toddler tightly against her chest, whispering frantic prayers under her breath while tears started forming in her eyes. The businessman in 18B started hyperventilating, his face growing red as he struggled to breathe. "What's happening?" someone demanded from the middle of the cabin. "Why won't anyone tell us what's happening?" Riley remained perfectly still, but her mind was racing. She recognized the signs of a medical emergency in the cockpit, and she knew exactly what that meant for everyone on board. The co-pilot was probably overwhelmed, dealing with both flying the aircraft and trying to help the captain. The flight attendants were trained for many emergencies, but not for this. She closed her eyes again and listened to the aircraft itself. The engines sounded normal. The air circulation was steady. They were still flying straight and level, which meant the autopilot was probably engaged. But that wouldn't last forever, especially during the approach and landing phases. "Please, someone has to know how to fly," Jessica called out again, her voice cracking with desperation. "We need help." Riley had been in situations like this before, though never on a commercial flight. She'd seen what happened when leadership failed and panic took over. People made bad decisions. They hurt themselves and others. They died. But she'd also seen what happened when someone stepped forward and took control. The problem was that stepping forward meant giving up her carefully maintained invisibility. It meant answering questions she didn't want to answer and revealing skills she preferred to keep hidden. It meant becoming the center of attention in a way that could complicate her life significantly. On the other hand, staying hidden meant watching 200 people die. Riley opened her eyes and looked around the cabin. The panic was spreading quickly, feeding on itself and growing stronger with each passing moment. Parents were crying. Children were screaming. Adults were demanding answers that no one could provide. She stood up slowly and deliberately, her movements calm and controlled despite the chaos around her. The businessman beside her was too busy hyperventilating to notice. The mother across the aisle was too focused on her child to pay attention. But Riley's movement had caught Jessica's attention. "Ma'am, please return to your seat," Jessica started to say. But Riley was already walking toward the front of the aircraft, moving through the chaos with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. When she reached the galley area, she spoke 6 words in a voice that cut through the noise like a blade. "Open the cockpit. I can fly." Jessica stared at Riley like she'd just claimed to be from another planet. The lead flight attendant had been trained for medical emergencies, security threats, and equipment failures, but nothing in her manual had prepared her for a mysterious passenger claiming she could fly a commercial aircraft. "Ma'am, you don't understand the situation," Mark started to explain, his voice strained with barely controlled panic. "The captain is unconscious. The co-pilot is trying to handle everything alone. We need a real pilot, someone with proper certification." "Military override lock system," Riley interrupted with technical precision, her voice carrying an edge of authority that made both flight attendants stop talking. "Pop the inner access panel and step back immediately." The words came out with such specific confidence that Jessica hesitated. This wasn't some panicked passenger making wild claims. This was someone who clearly knew things about aircraft systems that she shouldn't know. "Who are you?" Jessica asked, though even as she spoke, she was already moving toward the cockpit door. Something in Riley's steady gaze and calm demeanor cut through her training and spoke directly to her instincts. "Someone who can keep everyone alive," Riley replied simply. Behind them, the chaos in the cabin was growing worse. Passengers were demanding updates, children were crying, and the businessman from 18B had started hyperventilating so badly that another passenger was trying to help him breathe into a paper bag. The aircraft was still flying straight and level, but Riley could hear subtle changes in the engine pitch that suggested they were beginning their descent. Jessica made a decision that would save everyone's lives. She reached for the access panel beside the cockpit door, her hand shaking slightly as she followed Riley's instructions. The electronic lock disengaged with a soft click, and the heavy door swung open. Riley stepped inside without ceremony or explanation, and the sight that greeted her confirmed her worst fears. The captain was slumped over his controls, unconscious and breathing shallowly. His skin was pale and clammy, suggesting some kind of medical emergency. The co-pilot was frantically talking on the radio with ground control, sweat dripping down his forehead as he tried to manage both flying the aircraft and coordinating emergency response. The instrument panel showed their altitude dropping steadily. The autopilot was still engaged, but they were approaching the phase of flight where manual control would be essential. Warning lights were starting to illuminate across the control panel, and the co-pilot's voice was getting higher and more strained with each radio transmission. Riley took one comprehensive look at the control panel and processed the information instantly. This wasn't her first emergency, though it was her first in a commercial aircraft. The principles were the same: assess the situation, prioritize threats, take control, and execute the plan. She slid into the captain's seat like she'd been doing it for decades, her movements smooth and confident despite the unfamiliar cockpit layout. The co-pilot paused in his radio communication and stared at her with a mixture of relief and confusion. "Who are you?" he asked, though his voice carried more hope than suspicion. "Someone who can help?" Riley replied, reaching for the controls. "I've got the aircraft." The co-pilot nodded once, relief flooding his features. "Roger, you have the aircraft." From that moment forward, no one questioned who she was or whether she belonged in that seat. Riley's hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, making the subtle adjustments that kept the aircraft stable and on course. She'd flown in much more dangerous circumstances, but never with so many innocent lives depending on her. The radio crackled with air traffic control. demanding identification and status updates. Riley keyed the microphone and spoke with calm authority. "Denver Tower, this is Flight 482. We have an incapacitated captain and are requesting immediate priority approach." What she didn't tell them was that she was a ghost someone who existed in the spaces between official records, whose real name was classified, and whose current assignment was known only to a handful of people in the deepest levels of government. She was supposed to be invisible, forgettable, just another passenger on just another flight. But sometimes circumstances demanded that ghosts become visible. Air traffic control at Denver International Airport received an unexpected transmission from Flight 482 at exactly 3:47 in the afternoon. The voice was unfamiliar, calm, controlled, and distinctly female. "Denver Tower, this is temporary pilot in command taking over for incapacitated captain. Requesting immediate clearance for emergency priority approach runway 28 left." The controller's response came back uncertain. "Flight 482, identify yourself and state your qualifications." Riley's voice remained steady as granite. "Call sign Raven 7. Clearance requested under Federal Aviation Regulation Emergency Protocol Section 14. A long pause filled the radio frequency. Riley could practically hear the controllers scrambling to verify her credentials and clear the runway. She didn't have time for bureaucratic delays. "Just clear the runway approach," she said firmly. "I'm coming in heavy with passengers." While the radio exchanges continued, Riley worked the flight controls with the kind of precision that seemed to calm the entire aircraft. The co-pilot sat beside her in stunned silence, watching her hands move across switches and levers with practiced efficiency. "You're military," he finally said, though it was more of a statement than a question. "Something like that," Riley replied without taking her eyes off the instruments. The aircraft was approaching more challenging conditions as they descended through layers of unstable air. Wind shear warnings began flashing at 5,000 feet altitude. Multiple warning lights illuminated across the control panel, each one representing a potential threat to the aircraft and everyone on board. In the passenger cabin, people continued to cry and pray and grip their armrests with white knuckles. The panic hadn't subsided, but it had shifted from pure terror to a kind of desperate hope. Word had spread through the cabin that someone was flying the plane, though no one knew who or what their qualifications were. Riley adjusted the flap settings manually and reduced airspeed with the kind of fluid movement that comes from thousands of hours in similar situations. Under her breath, almost to herself, she muttered, "Come on, baby. Just like training. You know how to do this." A particularly rough jolt shook the entire aircraft as they hit turbulence, causing overhead bins to rattle and passengers to gasp in fear. Someone in the cabin shouted, "What the hell is happening up there?" "Landing safely," Riley answered calmly into her headset, though the passenger couldn't hear her response. She was executing a precision approach with the kind of controlled calm that only develops through training in life-or-death scenarios. The runway approached through the windscreen, concrete and lights growing larger with each passing second. Air traffic control had cleared all other aircraft from the approach pattern, and emergency vehicles lined both sides of the runway with their red and blue lights flashing in preparation. At 200 feet above ground level, crosswinds tried to push the aircraft sideways. Riley compensated with rudder adjustments and control inputs that kept them perfectly aligned with the center line. Her movements were smooth and confident, betraying years of experience in conditions far more challenging than this. The co-pilot watched in amazement as she handled the aircraft with a skill level that exceeded many commercial pilots. "Where did you learn to fly like this?" he asked. "Places you've never heard of," Riley replied, her attention focused entirely on the approaching runway, doing things that never officially happened. At 50 feet, she reduced power to idle and raised the nose slightly, preparing for touchdown. The main landing gear contacted the runway surface with more force than a typical landing, but perfectly aligned with no sideways motion or dangerous bounce that could cause loss of control. She immediately applied reverse thrust and wheel brakes, bringing the aircraft to a controlled stop approximately 300 yards before the end of the runway. For several seconds, complete silence filled both the cockpit and passenger cabin. No one clapped, no cheers erupted. Just 200 people slowly realizing they had absolutely no idea who had just saved their lives. Riley completed the shutdown checklist methodically, ensuring all systems were properly secured before anyone attempted to disembark. Through the cockpit windows, she could see paramedics rushing toward the passenger boarding bridge that was already being positioned. "That was incredible," the co-pilot said, staring at her with something approaching awe. "How did you?" But when he turned to ask the question, the pilot's seat was already empty. The woman from 18 had vanished as quietly as she had appeared, leaving behind only questions and the lingering scent of her subtle perfume. Emergency crews swarmed Flight 482 within minutes of touchdown. Paramedics reached the unconscious captain immediately, establishing that he was alive but required immediate medical intervention. Airport officials and federal investigators rushed toward the aircraft, desperate to interview the mysterious pilot who had just performed what many were already calling a miracle landing. But the woman from seat 18 had already disappeared completely. Jessica, the lead flight attendant, was among the first to be questioned by investigators. "Where is she?" demanded Agent Patricia Wong from the FAA. "We need to speak with whoever was flying the aircraft." "I don't know," Jessica replied honestly. "She just vanished. One minute she was shutting down the engines. The next minute the cockpit was empty." A TS, a security officer, caught only a brief glimpse of her in the terminal concourse, a woman in a black windbreaker walking with a barely noticeable limp, single backpack slung over one shoulder, moving through crowds like smoke. By the time he realized she might be significant, she had melted into the anonymous flow of travelers. The co-pilot, whose name was David Harrison, found himself at the center of an increasingly frustrated investigation. "She saved everyone's lives," he told the investigators. "She handled that aircraft like she'd been flying it for decades. I'd never seen anything like it. What did she tell you about her background?" Agent Wong pressed. "Nothing specific. Military, obviously. She knew things about aircraft systems that most people don't learn in civilian flight training. But she didn't give me a name or explain where she came from." The passengers were equally unhelpful. None of them had spoken to the mysterious woman. She'd boarded late, kept to herself, and made no impression on anyone until the moment she saved their lives. The businessman who'd sat beside her in row 18 couldn't even describe her face accurately. "She was just there," he said, struggling to find words. "Average height, dark hair, quiet. I tried to talk to her during takeoff, but she wasn't interested in conversation. Then, when everything went wrong, she just stood up and took control. Like she'd been waiting for it to happen." Local news reporters monitoring emergency frequencies descended on the airport within hours, hoping to identify the hero pilot. "Did anyone get her name?" they asked passengers. "Can you describe what happened in the cockpit?" Everyone shook their heads. The woman had appeared from nowhere, saved their lives, and disappeared back into nowhere. She'd left no trace except 200 people who were still breathing. But that evening, a senior air traffic control supervisor named Robert Martinez became curious enough to research the call sign she'd used. Raven 7 wasn't in any of the standard civilian aviation databases, but Martinez had connections in military aviation circles. What he found made him understand why she'd spoken with such authority. The call sign led to a heavily classified file with restricted access levels far above normal civilian aviation records. Most of the details were redacted, but enough information remained to paint a picture of someone extraordinary. Special Aviation Liaison, former 3rd Special Forces Group, attached to Classified Training Division. Current status, redacted. Current assignment, unknown. The file contained references to a legend whispered among military pilots, stories of a ghost aviator who appeared during emergencies, saved lives, and left no official trace of involvement. Real name classified and sealed under national security protocols. Service record buried so deep that most people with clearance had never heard of her. Martinez stared at the screen for a long time, trying to process what he'd discovered. This wasn't just some off-duty pilot who'd happened to be on the right flight at the right time. This was someone who existed in the shadows of government operations. Someone whose very presence on a commercial flight raised questions he didn't have clearance to ask. He closed the file and deleted his search history, but he couldn't delete the knowledge. Flight 482 had been saved by a ghost, and that ghost had vanished back into whatever world she'd come from. The story spread through aviation circles like wildfire. Pilots talked about it in crew lounges. Air traffic controllers shared it during shift changes. Flight attendants whispered about it in hotel bars. Everyone had their own theory about who she was and where she'd come from, but no one had answers. The woman from Atina had become a legend, proof that heroes don't always wear uniforms or announce their presence. Sometimes they sit quietly in economy class, hood up and headphones on, waiting for the moment when their skills are desperately needed. But legends, by definition, are hard to find when you need them most. 3 days after Flight 482 landed safely in Denver, FBI Special Agent Diana Foster arrived at the airport with a mandate to find the missing pilot. The Department of Homeland Security had flagged the incident as a potential security concern. Someone with advanced military flight training had boarded the commercial aircraft under an assumed identity and then vanished without a trace. This isn't about gratitude, Agent Foster explained to the assembled airport security personnel. This is about national security. We need to know who she is and why she was on that flight. The investigation revealed disturbing gaps in information. The boarding pass for seat Atina had been purchased with cash at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, using identification documents that appeared legitimate but didn't match any existing records. The security cameras had captured her boarding the aircraft, but the footage was partially obscured and showed only a generic figure in dark clothing. She knew exactly how to avoid being recorded clearly, observed Thomas Bradley, the airport's head of security. The angle she chose, the timing of her movements, this wasn't accidental. She didn't want to be identified. Agent Foster studied the grainy security footage, trying to extract any useful details. The woman moved with purpose and confidence, but in a way that suggested military training. Her posture, her gait, the way she carried herself, everything indicated someone with extensive experience in avoiding detection. Run facial recognition on what we have, Foster ordered. Cross-reference with military databases, federal employee records, and security clearance files. Someone with her skills doesn't just appear out of nowhere. The facial recognition search came back with 0 matches. Either the woman had never been photographed by any government agency, or her records were classified at levels above Agent Foster's clearance. Both possibilities were troubling for different reasons. Meanwhile, the media attention was intensifying. Flight 482 had become a national story, with passengers giving interviews about their miraculous rescue. The mystery of the vanishing pilot had captured public imagination, with social media users creating theories and amateur investigators trying to identify her. Captain James Richardson, who had been unconscious during the emergency, was released. from the hospital after 3 days of treatment for a severe hypoglycemic episode. When questioned about the incident, he could only express bewilderment and gratitude. "I don't remember anything after starting the approach announcement," he told investigators. "The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the hospital. Someone with extraordinary skill saved my life and the lives of every passenger on that aircraft." Co-pilot David Harrison was questioned extensively about his interaction with the mysterious woman. "She handled the aircraft like she'd been flying it for decades," he repeated. "Military training, obviously, but beyond that. She knew things about emergency procedures that most civilian pilots never learn." "Did she say anything that might indicate her background?" Agent Foster pressed. "She mentioned something about training. Called the aircraft baby, like she was talking to something familiar. And she muttered something about just like training during the approach, but nothing specific about where or when." The investigation hit dead ends at every turn. The woman had appeared on Flight 482 like a ghost, saved 200 lives, and vanished back into whatever shadowy world she'd come from. The only evidence of her existence was the testimony of the people she'd saved and the professional execution of an emergency landing that had impressed even veteran pilots. Agent Foster was beginning to suspect that finding this woman might be impossible through conventional means. The level of operational security she demonstrated suggested someone with access to resources and training far beyond typical military aviation. This was someone who existed in the spaces between official records, whose very presence on a commercial flight raised questions about ongoing classified operations. But the investigation had to continue. The public demanded answers, and the government needed to know whether the mysterious pilot represented a threat or an asset. The problem was that all the evidence suggested she was both. Late one evening, as Agent Foster reviewed the case files for the 100th time, she received an unexpected phone call from a blocked number. "Agent Foster." The voice was calm and controlled, distinctly female. "Stop looking for me." "Who is this?" Foster demanded, immediately signaling to her partner to trace the call. "Someone who saved 200 lives and wants to remain anonymous. The captain is recovering. The passengers are safe. The aircraft was returned to service. No one was hurt. Let it go. We need to meet," Foster said. "There are questions. There are always questions, Agent Foster. But some answers are classified. Above your pay grade. Stop looking for me, and I'll make sure you never have to find me." The line went dead. The trace came back with no useful information. The call had been routed through multiple encrypted servers across different countries, making it impossible to identify the source. Agent Foster stared at the phone, realizing that she'd just spoken with someone who had capabilities far beyond what she'd initially assumed. This wasn't just a mysterious pilot. This was someone with access to sophisticated communication systems and the technical knowledge to use them effectively. The investigation was officially suspended the next day, with a classified memo that Agent Foster was not authorized to read. The case files were sealed and transferred to an unnamed agency with higher security clearance. The message was clear. Some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. But the legend of the ghost pilot continued to grow, whispered in aviation circles, and debated in online forums. Flight 482 had been saved by someone extraordinary, and that someone had chosen to remain in the shadows where heroes sometimes lived. 6 months after Flight 482 landed safely in Denver, investigative journalist Amanda Price received an anonymous package containing documents that would blow the story wide open. The files were heavily redacted, but they contained enough information to piece together the truth about the mysterious pilot. The documents revealed the existence of a classified government program called Deep Cover Aviation Support, designed to place highly trained military pilots in civilian situations where they could respond to emergencies without revealing their true identities. The program was so secret that even most government officials didn't know it existed. According to the leaked documents, the woman from Seat 18A was Master Sergeant Riley Martinez, former member of the 3rd Special Forces Group and current participant in the Deep Cover program. Her military record was extraordinarily decorated. Combat pilot with over 3,000 hours of flight time in hostile environments, specialist in emergency aviation procedures, and veteran of multiple classified operations. The documents explained why she'd been on Flight 482. The Deep Cover program routinely placed operatives on commercial flights, trains, and other transportation systems, creating a network of skilled responders who could handle emergencies without revealing government involvement. Riley had been traveling to Denver for a routine reassignment when the captain's medical emergency occurred. She wasn't supposed to reveal herself, Amanda Price wrote in her explosive article. The Deep Cover program depends on anonymity, but when faced with the choice between maintaining her cover and saving 200 lives, Riley Martinez chose to act. The article revealed that Riley's call sign, Raven 7, was legendary among military pilots. She'd earned the designation during classified operations in hostile territory, where her ability to appear out of nowhere and extract personnel from impossible situations had saved countless lives. The name had become synonymous with miraculous rescues and impossible landings. But the most shocking revelation was that Riley Martinez had been declared dead in official records 3 years earlier, during a classified operation that had gone wrong. Her survival and subsequent recruitment into the Deep Cover program had been kept secret from everyone, including her own family. She's a ghost in the truest sense, Amanda Price wrote. Someone who exists in the spaces between official records, whose real identity is known only to a handful of people in the deepest levels of government. The passengers of Flight 482 were saved by someone who officially doesn't exist. The article created a media firestorm. Government officials scrambled to contain the damage, issuing statements that neither confirmed nor denied the existence of the Deep Cover program. The Pentagon refused to comment on Riley Martinez's status, citing national security concerns. But the story had taken on a life of its own. Riley Martinez became a symbol of hidden heroism, proof that extraordinary people walked among us in disguise, ready to step forward when needed most. Social media exploded with tributes to Raven 7 and demands for more information about the Deep Cover program. The government's response was swift and decisive. Amanda Price's article was removed from most online platforms within hours, citing national security concerns. The journalist herself was questioned by federal agents and warned about the consequences of publishing classified information, but the damage was done. The truth about Riley Martinez had escaped into the world, and no amount of government censorship could contain it. The passengers of Flight 482 finally had their answer about who had saved them, even if they'd never be able to thank her properly. Captain James Richardson, who had recovered fully from his medical emergency, spoke for all of them. When he gave his final interview about the incident, "I don't care what her real name is or what program she belongs to. She saved my life and the lives of every passenger on that aircraft. She's a hero, and heroes deserve to be remembered." The co-pilot, David Harrison, was more philosophical about the revelation. "I always knew she was special," he said. "You don't handle an aircraft like that without serious training and experience. Now I know why she was so calm. She'd been in much worse situations than a commercial aircraft emergency." Flight attendant Jessica Williams, who had made the crucial decision to open the cockpit door, felt vindicated by the truth. "I knew there was something different about her," she said. "The way she carried herself, the way she spoke with authority. I'm glad I trusted my instincts." But for Riley Martinez herself, the revelation was devastating. Her cover had been blown, her identity exposed, and her ability to operate in the shadows compromised. The deep cover program could no longer use her in civilian situations, and her effectiveness as a covert operative was permanently damaged. She'd saved 200 lives, but the cost had been her own anonymity and the career she'd dedicated her life to. The ghost pilot had become all too real, and real people couldn't disappear back into the shadows. The legend of Raven 7 would live on, but the woman behind the legend would have to find a new way to serve her country and her conscience. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who sacrifice everything, including their own secrecy, to save others. 1 year after Flight 482 landed safely in Denver, Riley Martinez stood in the small cemetery in her hometown of Tucson, Arizona, looking at a headstone that bore her own name. The grave was empty, part of the elaborate deception that had allowed her to enter the deep cover program, but the flowers were real, left by family members who still believed she was dead. The revelation of her survival had been devastating. For her parents and younger brother, who had grieved for 3 years believing she died in a training accident. The government had offered to arrange a reunion, but Riley had refused. Some sacrifices once made couldn't be undone. Raven 7 is requesting permission to land, came a voice behind her. Riley turned to see David Harrison, the co-pilot from Flight 482, approaching with 2 cups of coffee and a gentle smile. "How did you find me?" Riley asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Same way I found out your real name." David replied, "I'm a persistent guy, and I owe you my life. I figured you might need someone to talk to." They sat on a nearby bench, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. David had been tracking Riley's story ever since the truth came out, following the media coverage and the government's attempts to suppress it. "They offered me a position with the airline," David said. "Promotion to captain, based partly on my experience during the emergency. I turned it down. Why? Because I realized there are more important things than career advancement. I joined a non-profit organization that provides flight training to veterans. Figured I'd learn something from the best." Riley smiled slightly. It was the first genuine smile she'd managed in months. The deep cover program was disbanded after the story broke. Too much public attention, too many questions. "I'm officially retired from active duty. What will you do now?" "I don't know. I spent so many years being invisible that I'm not sure how to be visible. The government offered me a position as a flight instructor, but I'm not sure I want to. Stay in aviation. Too many memories." David nodded, understanding. "The passengers from 482 started a foundation," he said. "They're calling it the Raven 7 Foundation. It provides scholarships for veterans who want to pursue careers in emergency response firefighting, paramedics, search and rescue. They asked me to find you and see if you'd consider being involved. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of attention. You wouldn't have to be public about it. They just want to know that their hero approves of what they're doing in your name. 200 people are alive because of you, Riley. They want to honor that." Riley sipped her coffee and considered the offer. For so long, she'd defined herself by her ability to remain hidden, to solve problems without taking credit. But maybe there was another way to serve, another way to help people without disappearing into the shadows. "The captain recovered completely," David continued. "James Richardson. He's back to flying, but he speaks at aviation safety conferences now. Always tells the story of the mysterious pilot who saved his life. He doesn't use your real name, of course. Just calls you the Angel in 18A. Angel," Riley repeated with a bitter laugh. "That's a first. The flight attendant, Jessica, she started a program to train cabin crew in emergency decision-making. She credits you with teaching her that sometimes you have to trust your instincts, even when it goes against protocol. Riley looked at her empty grave again, thinking about the woman who had died 3 years ago in official records. That woman had been defined by her secrecy, her ability to operate in the shadows without leaving traces. But maybe it was time for a different kind of existence. "Tell me more about this foundation," she said finally. David's face lit up with hope. They've already raised over $2 million. The passengers were so grateful that they've been telling their story everywhere, encouraging donations. They want to help veterans transition to civilian careers in emergency services. Flight 482 proved that military training can save civilian lives in unexpected ways. And they want me involved? They want to know you approve. That? You think they're honoring your sacrifice appropriately. Most of them still don't know your real name. The foundation just refers to the pilot who saved Flight 482. They respect your privacy, but they want to do something meaningful with their second chance at life. Riley stood up and walked to her own headstone, running her fingers over the engraved letters of her name. Master Sergeant Riley Martinez, it read, died in service to her country. The dates were accurate for when she'd officially died, but the story was incomplete. "I spent 3 years being dead," she said quietly. "Maybe it's time to start living again." "Does that mean you'll consider the foundation?" "It means I'll consider a lot of things. For the first time in years, I have choices that don't involve national security clearances or classified missions. It's terrifying and liberating at the same time." David joined her beside the headstone. The passengers created something else too. A scholarship specifically for women veterans who want to become pilots. They're calling it the 18 Scholarship. They figured you chose that seat for a reason. Riley laughed, a real laugh this time. "I chose that seat because it was close to the emergency exits and had a good view of the engines. Old habits. Well, now it's going to help other women follow in your footsteps." The first recipient starts flight training next month. Her name is Maria Santos, former Army medic who wants to become a helicopter rescue pilot. She sounds perfect for it. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the desert sky. Riley felt something shifting inside her, a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. The ghost pilot was gone, but maybe Riley Martinez could find a new way to serve. "There's something else," David said hesitantly. "The airline wants to name their new safety training center after you. They've developed new protocols for handling medical emergencies in the cockpit based on what happened during our flight. They want to call it the Martinez Center for Aviation Safety Excellence. They want to name it after someone who's officially dead. They want to name it after someone who saved lives. The details can be worked out later." Riley looked last time at her empty grave, then turned away from it with a sense of finality. "I think it's time to go home." "Where's home now?" "I don't know yet, but I'm ready to find out." As they walked away from the cemetery, Riley felt the weight of years of secrecy lifting from her shoulders. She would always be Raven 7 to the people she'd saved, but maybe she could also be Riley Martinez again, not the ghost who operated in shadows, but a real person who chose to step into the light. 6 months later, Riley stood in front of a group of veteran students at the newly opened Martinez Center for Aviation Safety Excellence. She wore a simple flight instructor's uniform with her real name embroidered on the chest. No rank insignia, no military decorations, just her name and the title Chief Safety Instructor. "Emergency situations don't ask for your credentials," she told the class. "They don't care about your rank or your background or whether you're officially qualified to handle them. They only care whether you're prepared to act when action is needed." In the back of the classroom, David Harrison smiled as he watched his former mysterious savior teach a new generation of pilots. The foundation had funded the training of over 100 veterans in various emergency response careers. The 18 Scholarship had helped dozens of women pursue aviation careers. The Martinez Center had become a model for aviation safety training worldwide. Riley had found her new mission, preparing others to be ready when they were needed most. She couldn't operate in the shadows anymore, but she could ensure that when the next emergency happened, someone would be ready to step forward. After class, one of her students approached her with a question. "Instructor Martinez, is it true you once landed a commercial airliner with 200 passengers after the captain collapsed?" Riley smiled and gave the same answer she always gave. "I once did what needed to be done when no one else could do it. That's what I'm teaching you to do. Be ready for the moment when ordinary people need extraordinary help." The student nodded and walked away, not realizing she'd just spoken with a legend. But that was exactly how Riley preferred it. She was no longer the ghost pilot who appeared from nowhere and vanished into mystery. She was a teacher, a mentor, and a guardian angel who chose to stay visible. Sometimes, the greatest heroes are the ones who give up their secrets to help others find their strength. Riley Martinez had sacrificed her invisibility to save 200 lives. And in doing so, she discovered that being seen could be just as powerful as being hidden. Flight 482 had landed safely because someone extraordinary chose to act when action was needed. The legend of Raven 7 would live forever, but the woman behind the legend had found something even more valuable than heroism. She'd found peace. And in the end, that was the greatest landing of all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.